Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast Little Seeds of Knowledge, the podcast which dives into topics relating to science, technology, business, or social issues with each episode. We hope that you are able to plant your own little seed of knowledge and watch it grow as you further explore each topic explained in each episode. I'm your host, Riddhi, and I'm so grateful that you were able to tune in for this week's episode. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another podcast episode. I'm so glad you are here, and I'm so glad that you are joining me, Riddhi, on another podcast episode of Little Seeds of Knowledge. So, in today's podcast episode, I'm going to be talking about essentially how I find inspiration, and I'm going to be discussing burnout and just kind of things along both of those topics. I will be mostly talking about burnout and how I deal with burnout and like what burnout looks like for me, and how I prevent, or if it does happen, kind of how I treat it almost. So this is a kind of personal episode to me, and it's a very important one because burnout is something that I deal with quite frequently, and it's something that I'm learning to deal with and just kind of figuring out how to adapt. Before we get into the episode, I do want to put out a statement saying that this episode discusses my and only my own experience with burnout. Whatever I go through and whatever I do may not be applicable to your own experience, and so please take what I say here with a grain of salt. I know burnout is a very sort of touchy subject because everyone has different experiences with it, and so what I'm trying to say here is basically I don't want to generalize anything that I say here. I'm gonna try my best not to generalize it to everyone else because this is a very important topic, and it is also a very touchy subject for a lot of people who go through burnout. So I just want to kind of put it out there that what I'm talking about today has mostly to do with my own experience with burnout, how I deal with it, and what it looks like for me. So I'm not trying to generalize it or anything. I think it's important to educate yourself on certain topics, listening to a lot of different people talk about it rather than just me. I know if you go on YouTube, there's a lot of different people talking about burnout and what it means to them. So I would definitely suggest to go and learn from a variety of resources. And just use my story with burnout as one of them. But just try not to generalize it, and just try to make sure that you guys know that this episode is only about my experience with burnout, and so take what I say with a grain of salt, but I still hope you enjoy it and you can hopefully relate to certain parts of it. So that is essentially kind of going to be the whole gist of this episode. But as always, before we actually get into the episode itself, we're going to talk about our word of the week, the song of the week, as well as the seed of the week. So first of all, the word of the week that we're going to be talking about is learning. This week I've been doing a lot of learning, whether that be learning about Google Analytics, Facebook ads, or social media. This week for me has been a huge focus on just learning different skills and just learning about different topics. So like I said in my last one, the seed that I planted was to learn about Google Analytics and Facebook ads, and I've been enjoying it so far. So this week has just been about learning, and I've been very happy with what I have been learning. So my song of the week is Good Times by Owl City and Carly Rae Jepsen. Oh, I do not know how to fully pronounce her name, but I think it's Carly Rae. Okay, so it is Carly Rae Jepsen. So I chose this song because first of all, it's one of my favorite songs, and lately I've been feeling a lot of nostalgia for some weird reason, especially this week. So I decided I've kind of been listening to my whole nostalgia playlist on my music platforms, like on YouTube and stuff, and Good Times is just one of those songs that really makes me think back to the time period of when it was released. If you listen to my last episode, I talk about how I associate music with different time periods, and since Good Time was released in 2012, I was in elementary school then. I was still growing up, and so every time I listen to that song, it always brings back memories of elementary school. And it's just overall a really like nice, calming, like it's like an energetic song, but it's just well crafted, and it's one of my favorite songs to just put and listen to, and it really just gets me pumped up and it makes me feel happy and in an amazing mood. So yeah, I've been listening to this song, and specifically just songs from the 2000s, as I've been feeling pretty nostalgic. So yeah, that's why I chose to put it as the song of my week. Let's move on to the seed of basically this week as well as the coming weeks. So I've been doing watercolor painting this week. Is something I started. I made about 3 paintings so far. They've been super basic, nothing complicated at all, but basically I just needed some sort of creative outlet after a long day of work. So I would spend about an hour almost every day of this week doing some sort of watercolor painting, and I've really enjoyed it. It's something that I definitely continue to plan on doing. I think watercolor painting is honestly just a great way to really, just sit down and relax and also create something. So it also kind of like helps with the creative aspect of me, because this is my own creation that I do. So I really enjoy doing it. And if you're looking for something kind of easy to do, I would definitely recommend watercolor painting. I think obviously there's a couple of, paintings to do that are more difficult than others, but I think watercolor painting is something that almost anyone can do, and it's just really soothing. You can go and search up pictures online that you want to paint, or you can just kind of come up with your own little thing and sketch that out. Watercolor painting is just so beautiful and aesthetic, and yeah, it's just a really calming way to relax and unwind after a really long day. So I would definitely recommend watercolor painting. I've painted so far like basically these yin and yang signs. So I've been watching Avatar: The Last Airbender and Legend of Korra, like I've said in my past episodes, and the series is based around the four elements of earth, water, fire, and air. And so I've done 2 yin and yang paintings where I've basically done on one yin and yang sort of symbol, I've done fire and water, because those 2 are opposites, and on the other one I've done earth and air because those 2 are opposites. I kind of like symbolically shown those 2 opposites on the yin and yang symbol. And yeah, maybe I'll put a picture of that on my Instagram, so if you want to go check it out, I'll post those paintings on Instagram, as well as I have painted sort of like this mother and daughter painting that I found online. And yeah, it's kind of like an ombre gradient, almost like a sunset, and then you just have a mom and her daughter just standing out there, and the daughter's holding a balloon. It's really pretty. And yeah, so I've made those 3 this week, and watercolor painting has just been so good and fun to do, so I would definitely recommend for you to try it as well. An update from the last seed. Like I said, I've been learning Google Analytics and Facebook ads. They're both super interesting. Google Analytics covers more of like the analytical side of when you're tracking a website and you're trying to publish reports, like you're trying to figure out users, you're trying to see if marketing campaigns worked, you're trying to see how many visitors visit your website, what they interact with. It's kind of just all analytics, and to make sure that whatever services that you're providing on our website are the best for your users. Facebook ads is just mostly about learning how ads are placed on Facebook, what type of ads are placed on Facebook, how does Facebook determine which ads to place, and the algorithm that they have is just really interesting and enticing the way they do it. So I definitely recommend you checking that out if you are into that sort of stuff like digital marketing. So I hope to finish Google Analytics by September and Facebook ads by October. But yeah, without further ado, let's get on to this week's episode. So what really started me? So I was supposed to do an episode about something else this week, but that episode I just didn't really know what I wanted to talk about. So I actually pre-planned my episodes like a month ahead, so I already kind of have an idea of the type of episodes I want to do in October and September right now. Like I pre-planned my episodes, so I know exactly what to record and outline. And so I already knew the episodes that I wanted to do this week. I was supposed to basically talk about a certain organization that I had found online. I wanted to do an episode about that, but that episode required a lot of research and required a lot of like planning ahead. It wasn't just something I could just sit down and outline from the top of my head. It's actually something I had to go in and research into, so it would take a little bit more time. And to be honest, I don't know why, I just didn't feel the inspiration to go and talk about that, at least not right now. I'll definitely do an episode about that soon, but I just didn't feel like doing that this week, and I just felt kind of lost, and I didn't really have any inspiration because I didn't really know what else to talk about. So I was sitting there staring at my computer screen. I was like wondering, like, what am I going to put up for this week, because I kind of feel the need to be publishing at least one episode per week, especially for my podcast, until obviously the summer is over and college starts, and that's a goal that I have for myself, is to publish one episode. And so I knew I needed to get an episode out, so I was just sitting there and I was like, what am I gonna do? Like, I don't feel like I have a lot of inspiration. And it just struck me weirdly, like, why don't I just talk about that? Like, why don't I just talk about not having inspiration and burnout and kind of something along those lines, because it is something that I do struggle with, and it's something that I think is really important to talk about. So why don't I just do an episode on that? So that's kind of what prompted me to basically do this episode. It's not something that I would imagine myself talking about, but it just came out of nowhere. So I was like, well, it didn't really come out of nowhere, but it's just something that just came to my mind. So I was like, I might as well do an episode because this is important to me, and it's definitely something that I have not ever really talked about. So yeah, it would be kind of be an interesting experience. It would kind of be an interesting episode to record. So that's kind of where this came from. And so yeah, basically I'm going to be talking about burnout. And for me, burnout is something that I heard a lot from social media influencers first, but I realized that it's something that actually happens to a lot of people. And for me, like I mentioned, it's actually kind of quite often. I get burnt out, I would say, every few months. And the reason why that happens for me is because I'm that type of person that, really grinds a lot and does a lot of work for like a couple of months, like maybe 2 or 3 months. Like, I really am doing something, I'm going full on at it, and I'm constantly working, I'm constantly making myself busy, and then it comes to the point where I just get overwhelmed and I kind of slip, like I kind of lose the motivation, I kind of lose inspiration, and so I just kind of like lose my trail of thought and I don't feel like working anymore. And so at that point, to me, it almost feels like I'm burnt out because I've been working so much, and then all of a sudden I just don't feel the need to really be doing anything anymore. And and it's obviously like a very unhealthy thing because, I feel like working, there's a portion of time that I'm working, and then there's a portion of time that I just don't really feel like doing anything. But it's something that I've been working on this year, especially with staying at home. It's something that has definitely really been at the top of my mind. As staying at home means you feel the need to constantly be working, you feel the need to be productive, as you think like, oh, I have all this time, like I might as well do something productive with it, right? So yeah, it's just something that I've been realizing I've had an issue with, and that something that I should work on changing. And will it ever completely go away? No, that's for sure. Like, it's something I'm going to constantly struggle with, but it's something that I realized that I have to work on making a little bit easier and better for myself. Like I said, this is maybe my own experience with burnout, so consider my viewpoint as just one resource to help you plant, your own seed of knowledge if this is something you're struggling with as well. So what exactly is burnout for me? Like I said, it's when I am unmotivated to work. I just want to sit and pretty much do nothing all day and just, sit on my phone and scroll through social media or just watch YouTube. It's kind of like when I'm physically stretched to my limits and I just can't meet the physical demands of work for me, which is usually school related, like homework and stuff, and then career related. I just kind of sit and lay in bed, I read, and I don't really do anything that kind of really needs my attention, like I said, like school and career. I just don't feel the motivation to go out and work. Obviously, when I did have school, because right now I'm on summer break, and I did feel like that, I would still eventually end up doing my schoolwork because, I didn't really feel, I know I had to, because otherwise my grades would be slipping, and that's not something my parents would necessarily be happy with. But it honestly took a lot for me to go out and do that schoolwork. Like, there would be evenings when I come home from school and I wouldn't get any of my homework done, and then I would be waking up really early the next morning and I'd be grinding out my homework, and it was like almost a really consistent cycle. And for me, that's kind of a form of a burnout for me, because I would just feel like so stretched to my limits that I wouldn't do anything after school, and then I would kind of stack it all up and do it the next morning, and I'd wake up early, like at 4 or something, and I'd be working, and then I'd come home from school, and it was kind of like a continuous cycle. Obviously for me, now it's kind of different now that I'm at home and I don't have school anymore. Like, what does it look like? For me, it usually looks like like a day where I'm just sitting on my phone and, I'm just kind of not really doing anything that I'm supposed to be doing that's quote unquote important, like whether it be learning something or whether it be, preparing for college. Yeah, so I think now, obviously, burnout isn't happening as much because I don't have a lot of expectations that I need to be meeting necessarily. Like quarantine and stuff has really kind of showed me like I don't really have like that many expectations, especially during summer, so it doesn't happen as much, but that's kind of like what burnout looks like for me. I feel like sometimes personally for me it's necessary because I get a break, but then as much as necessary it is, dealing with it is really difficult. I kind of feel like I'm trapped in my own mind and I kind of feel like there's no way out. It's really hard for me to kind of find a routine again, and I'm just kind of very aimless. Like I don't really know what's going on or what I should be doing. I kind of don't really have a plan or an idea. And I'm not saying that you have to be, like on top of things like all the time. Like it's okay to slip sometimes because we're human and we do that. But for me, I like having a structured plan throughout my day. Like there are some people who can go about and get things done and they don't have to be super structured. And then there's people like me who need to have that structured plan of what I'm doing throughout my day. Otherwise, I just slack off. And burnout is especially hard for me because, I have like XYZ, like 30 structured days going straight where I'm constantly working, and then all of a sudden I kind of, like I lose motivation, and then I have like almost like 4 or 5 days where I'm literally not doing anything and I'm barely working, and that's kind of a very toxic cycle for me. And like I said, like different people have different experiences. Like, your circumstances really determine what burnout would look like for you, your job, where you are in your part of life, like what are your responsibilities. And so what I'm trying to say is like, this is what I deal with as a student, as a student and as a college student. So your experience might look different, but yeah. This is kind of what just happens for me, is where I have a hardcore productive streak and then I don't feel like doing anything. And so I just overwork and then it leads to burnout, and then I build myself back up and then the cycle just continues. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of what it just looks like for me, but yeah, that's what it looks like for me. And now I'm going to basically be talking about what I do to kind of prevent my burnout, and if when it does happen, what I do to kind of treat it and get myself out of that cycle. So obviously the most important thing for me is prevention. I do want to try to prevent it from happening as much as I can, but obviously it's kind of inevitable, like it's gonna happen. So I'm also going to be discussing kind of what I do when it does happen and how I kind of get out of that cycle and kind of build myself back up again. So first, let's talk about what I do to kind of quote unquote prevent it or make sure that it doesn't happen as much as it does. Okay, so first, what I do to really prevent burnout. Okay, so essentially what I do to kind of prevent myself into slipping like a cycle of burnout is, one, I try to do one artistic thing each day. I think it's really important to have a balance of work, but then also not just be constantly working all day. You also kind of need to have some sort of creative outlet where you got to kind of exercise like your creative mind and like have like a relaxation period. And so for me, that happens when I try to kind of do just one artistic thing. So whether that be like making a quick sketch, whether that be dancing and just like putting on my favorite music and blasting and just dancing in my room, or whether that be, like I said, now I'm doing watercolor painting, right? So just doing anything sort of artistic and just something that kind of lets me like relax, and things like that I think is really important to find your own creative outlet. You can always do DIY, you can always do like any sort of art project that you find online. You can journal, you can read, anything that kind of just helps you just kind of relax and just keep your brain creatively going. I think having a creative stimulant is really important, and that just helps me prevent burnout because it shows that I'm not constantly working and that my brain has something to sort of like not exercise but necessarily just like relax, like some sort of activity at the end of the day to just relax. Something else I do also is I try to exercise, and exercise for me, it doesn't have to mean like a really 30-minute hardcore workout. Like even if it's just a walk, that still works out for me. It's just something like some sort of physical activity I do and I want to do, because while having something that's, I think exercising just really gets my brain going and pumped and ready to work, especially when you do it in the morning. Now I find myself doing it in the afternoon because I like using my mornings to work, and just get my things done in the day. But I think exercise is important because, you get to work on yourself, you kind of just get to be active, and just, it just feels really nice when your body is active and it's just ready to go. Yeah, I think that's something that really helps me, is because it puts my mindset in the right zone almost. So yeah, I think exercise is just something that definitely has helped me a lot, in preventing burnout. I also talk with my friends and family and I ask them about their own experiences. I think communication and socializing is really important. Obviously, right now, given the circumstances, it's not something that you can just super easily do, right? But I think I like to at least video call my friends 2 to 3 times a week, and we just kind of talk about what we've been doing this week, what have we been experiencing, just what we've learned, and just, just anything that's on our mind. We'd like to vent, and I think that's really important to do because you can talk about your own experiences. Like, if you're feeling down, you can maybe talk to your friend about that, and they can give you advice or anything. You can talk to your family. And yeah, so I think that's just really important to do, is just socializing, because it really just keeps you in that mindset, because there's people around you and you have a support system. Yeah, another thing I really like doing is taking things one step at a time rather than doing everything at once. So that would mean for me breaking up certain things. So if there's like a big project that I want to do, or if there's something I want to learn, right, I try to break that up rather than not really having a clear plan of what I'm doing before I go into it. Otherwise, I usually just tend to do everything at once, and that's a little bit of overwhelming for me if I try to take on something all in one day, because I think it just creatively, like, it kind of stresses me out. So for example, even just publishing a podcast episode is something that I do on 2 separate days. So for me, it looks like, if I'm writing for my podcast episode, I usually outline on Wednesdays or Thursdays, and then I actually record and edit on Sundays. And splitting it up into 2 just really helps me, because I don't feel like burnout of just doing that one thing for 2 straight hours. Instead, if it's broken up, I kind of get a little bit of a breather in between. And also, just kind of doing things beforehand just makes me feel a little bit more proactive and ready and motivated to work on something else. So like right now I said I'm learning Google Analytics, and I'm honestly taking it one step at a time. It's not like I'm sitting down and doing like 4 sections in one day. I'm telling myself that as long as I do one section in one day, it's good, and I'm happy enough to just do that, rather than sitting down and doing the first 4 sections in one day. Just doing it and taking it slowly one at a time just really helps me prevent burnout, because I don't feel overwhelmed with what I'm doing. So yeah, that is something also super important to me. And I also think the last thing is learning something new. The reason why I'm saying this is because sometimes a lot of people feel burnt out because they keep on doing the same thing over and over and over again, to the point where they just get tired of it, and so they don't feel like working on that thing anymore. So it's really important to just kind of keep on doing something else on the side and keep on learning about something else, so that you kind of obviously always feel like creatively inspired and your brain is fresh and ready to go. I think it's always important to be learning about something, whether it be listening to a podcast every morning that teaches you about a topic that you've never heard before, or whether it that be taking like a free online course. Like, there's tons of free online courses you can take, and yeah, just something that you're really interested in about. I think learning is something that really keeps your brain always going, and it obviously always gives you a chance to spark conversations and find new interests. So that is also something super important that I tend to do, is I constantly make sure that I'm learning something. That way I do not feel overwhelmed with already of my daily routine. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That is what I do in order to try to kind of prevent myself from going into that cycle of overworking a lot and then not feel like doing anything the next couple of days. But yeah, when I do get into kind of burnout and I'm in that zone where I don't feel like doing anything, what do I do to kind of like take it step by step and eventually build myself back up again? The first thing, like I said, is I take it step by step. Burnout is not something super easy to cope with, and it takes a lot of gut and it takes a lot of courage to kind of build build yourself back up again. So you have to remind yourself to take it step by step. You can't fix yourself in a day. You can't really fix any sort of issues in a day. I have to remind myself that as long as I take it step by step and I slowly ease myself back into, my normal work routine, that is a lot more mentally, it's just a lot more mentally better for myself. Rather than going all in at once, not working at all for something like 4 days and then doing everything at one day. I'd rather take it as doing 2 to 3 things each day and then building myself up back slowly, if that makes sense. So yeah, the important thing is to take it step by step. Another thing I really like doing is journaling. Just my feelings and just talking about it to myself, because when I journal and when I just kind of talk about it to myself, I think I just realize the mindset that I'm in, and I kind of allow myself to put my feelings on a piece of paper, so I kind of release my emotions that are inside, and whatever I'm feeling just kind of slowly comes out, because it's on another form of medium and it's not clouded in my brain, and it's not physically, it's not mentally draining me. So yeah, I think filtering out your feelings and just kind of journaling about it really helps me to take out whatever is clouding my brain and slowly kind of get rid of it and learn from it. And yeah, so I think bullet journaling really helps me with that. Another thing that I do is I ask myself what I want to do and the value I have. I think sometimes, and this is what I realized, especially when I was in school and I was doing mundane homework every single day, and I would just be constantly working and I just didn't feel like there was any value coming from it, I would kind of stop and ask myself, what am I doing and how can I make it so that I gain actual value from it? I think sometimes a lot of reason that people slip into some sort of a burnout cycle is because they don't feel like what they're doing anymore is giving them any value, and so they don't feel the need to work on whatever they're doing. So I think when you are in burnout, it's a really important way, when you feel, not when you are, when you're feeling the feeling of burnout, I think it's really important to ask yourself what you're doing and how is it giving you value. If it's not giving you value, is there any way you can sort of cut that out? And if it's something necessarily you're doing obviously homework, what can you do to change it so that when you do it, it gives you value? Sometimes, and I think doing the second one is a lot more important, is changing up your routine so that it gives you value, because it's not that easy to just cut things out of our life, especially when you get burnt out by things that are important for you to be doing. So for me, like I said, that's if I get burnt out from school and everything that I'm doing, homework and stuff, I ask myself, what can I do to make homework feel more valuable towards me, whether that be changing up the way I do homework, whether that be taking the things I learn and figuring out how they actually apply to real life, or having discussions or finding interests from what I'm doing. I think that is super important as well. Another thing I like to do is, usually when I'm in burnout, I don't feel like doing my normal routine, usually when I feel that way, so instead I find a new hobby to do. And I think when I do a new hobby and I feel like I'm doing well in that hobby, I kind of start excelling at it, I kind of get the passion to work again. And yeah, so I think that's just also a really great way when you're feeling burnout, is you kind of, sometimes it's a reminder for you to kind of expand what you're doing, rather than just your normal routine. So finding a new hobby is really important as well. And yeah, that's kind of what I do when I do feel like I am burning out. Those are just some of the tips that I do for myself. I take it step by step. I journal my feelings. I talk to my family and friends. I ask myself about what I'm doing and whether I'm getting value from it, and I usually find a new hobby. So that is pretty much it for me about burnout. I think this was definitely a more difficult episode for me to record, because I know this is a very touchy subject and people have different ways that they deal with it, and so I want to make sure that whatever I'm saying here, I don't want to offend anyone at all, and so that is why sometimes, personally for me, I stray away from talking about very touchy subjects, because I just don't want to honestly offend anyone. It's not my intention at all. It's not my impact. Something that I've been learning recently is that it's really important to look at your impact rather than your intent. And for me, a lot of the times when I record my podcast episodes or I write my blog posts, I do it with the intention, but lately I've been thinking about my impact instead. And so my impact with this podcast episode that I'm recording is that hopefully you can learn a little bit from my own experience with burnout and, apply just a little bit of it in however you deal with it. My intent is not to offend anyone at all. I think burnout is a really important topic, and it's something that we all deal with uniquely. And so if you do feel like any part of my thing was offensive or I may have misphrased something, please call me out on it. I would love to educate myself. But overall, I just kind of recorded this episode because it is a very important thing that I deal with. Burnout is something that is a thing that I often have to deal with and learn from. And so I kind of wanted to share my experience, and hopefully my impact was that someone else can take away something from it. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't really have anything else to say. But I hope you're all doing well and staying safe, and I will see you next week for another podcast episode as well. All right. Make sure to subscribe, rate, review this podcast. You can follow us on our Instagram page at Little Seeds of Knowledge Podcast.